Hello and welcome. I'm working in my big mandala sketchbook today. It's something I do every year. In fact, this is my 5th year of creating a mandala series in this sketchbook. So if you stick around for a bit, I'm going to take you on a quick tour of the sketchbook so far. As you can see, while I love working in the sketchbook because it contains the project, one of the things that is very handy when you're drawing mandalas is the ability to keep rotating and rotating the book. So that does make the fact that this isn't a spiral bound book a little bit tricky for me to work with it because obviously I've got that extra half of the book flipping around that I've got to keep manoeuvring to get my hand in the right angle. And the reason you want to keep turning it, I think, when you're drawing these sort of circular designs is that your hand moves in a particular way and will draw a particular curve or angle best in repetition if you keep using the same angle to do it. In other words, I don't leave the book straight and try and draw things upside down because I know that I will not be able to get quite as uniform a look as if I keep rotating it. And I love this repetitive process of starting out in something I can erase, like some sort of pencil, and then when I'm happy with that design I go back over it again with a waterproof pen, because it's such a reflective kind of meditative process. It does take a long time, and instead of making you watch the whole thing, I thought I would break it up and give you a quick tour. Now this is my favourite sketchbook from Hahnemuhle. It's a square format, which obviously is perfect for mandalas, and the paper's nice and thick, but it isn't actually watercolour paper. So it will take light washes, and that's what I use, is some form of watercolour every year. But I'm not using it the way I would use watercolour paper because I know that the sketchbook pages just won't cope with that. And every year I draw about 10 of these mandalas, and I'm really enjoying the process of coming back to it each year and seeing what sort of new ideas kind of evolve, because that really is the way this process works. You start with a kind of formula, the fact that you're going to draw something round, some sort of repeated designs, and every year I try something different. The ones we're looking at now is the year I got really into what they call sacred geometry and doing very precise interconnected circles. But I also love the more organic ones, and sometimes I'm just not feeling it, as you can see, and I move on. And then in this particular year I started drawing what I call vindalas, which I believe is my own invention, and I'm very proud of them and I have an awful lot of fun doing them. One's like this, where it's kind of a central vine that repeats all the way around the mandala. And every year I use some sort of watercolour form, but I like it to be something portable, even more portable than my little watercolour palette. So it's usually something like watercolour markers, some sort of water-soluble pastels. Sometimes I use those water-soluble oil pastels, but my favourite is probably the watercolour pencils. And we'll get back to that mandala I was drawing in a minute, and I'll show you a bit more of those. You can see in my sketchbook there's some that I just haven't finished. I'm not sure if I'm going to go back and fill those in or just leave them. And some pages like this one I've had to leave because the water-soluble media has bled through to the background, the back page, which is a little bit unfortunate there. These ones, these open ones, are rather fun, where I resisted the temptation to complete the whole circle. So sometimes the circle is unbroken and sometimes it isn't. And I do this every December, so there's often a fairly festive feel because that's the mood I'm in December. And I like these angular ones too. There's so much you can do with that circular form. Let's get back to the one I was working on earlier. I'm in the middle of that sort of second phase of using my my waterproof pen to complete the design. So it's a chance to kind of correct any slight errors I think I might have made in the pencil stage, but for me it's a bit of a personality test, and I really see my impatience because sometimes that's what this requires, is that very patient repetition of marks. And this is one of my favourite things, and one of the things I really enjoy coming to every December. I love my elephant pencil roll there, and what it contains is my collection of inktense pencils. If you haven't seen these before, they're a really terrific art supply. They're watercolour pencils, but they're a little bit special because they are actually permanent once you have activated them with water. And when you do activate them with water, what seems like pretty ordinary marks made by the dry watercolour pencil turns into some very fun, vibrant colour. It's actually more of an ink than a watercolour. And of course, pencils can be very unrewarding to use unless you've got a fun sharpener. And this one was one of my little treats to myself in my studio, because that's one of those pencil sharpeners with a handle to turn, so it always feels like a piece of official machinery for my studio, and I love it. Now, one of the things I have remembered from the past, but it always takes a while for it all to come back to me because I have a year in between each series here, well, 11 months, but I do recall finding it hard to get enough value contrast in these using these pencils, by which I mean enough lights and darks. So that's what I'm trying to do here now. I'm trying to lay down quite a light but fairly even application of this pencil, and you might have noticed I messed up there and put orange in the wrong space. So while I panicked and got out my eraser and tried to erase these coloured pencils, which in theory is not possible, I think I might have just got away with it because it's so pale and because it's another warm colour that I was trying to put on top there. And I hope you see what I mean there about how kind of ordinary the colouring looks when it's dry, and then when you pop the water on, it suddenly springs to life. And there's so much you can do with these pencils. I've got to be careful because I know that my paper won't take too much water. It'll handle some fairly well, but it's better if I can do it in one layer. So if I want to do any extra shading or incorporate multiple colours, I need to do that all in the dry stage just because of this paper. And then once I layer over one sort of light wash of water, those dry pigments turn to ink and any of my messy colouring is kind of forgiven. And those little shapes that I'm drawing now, those are exactly the reason I enjoy these inktense pencils for this job. See, once I've wet them, when that dries, unlike normal watercolour pencils, the colour isn't going to reactivate if I happen to get it wet again. So when I go back to fill in that middle bit, I don't have to worry so much because I'm using one of those water brushes and it's not the most precise tool, and I'm not the most precise artist. If you've been around here before, you'll know. But it's going to make it a little bit more forgiving for me because even if I go over the lines a bit with my middle application of water, it won't lift the underneath layers. And if you're interested in creating a themed sketchbook, there's another sketchbook series I've been sharing here on YouTube, and I'll pop the links in the card in the top right to that. That's really quite different. It's much smaller and it's some little figure drawing inspiration. So if you're thinking of creating a sketchbook practice for the new year, that might be something for you to take a look at. Now what I'm using is a Posca pen, which is acrylic paint marker, and it's in a lovely metallic gold. Because it's Christmas time, I can't resist adding in a little bit of extra bling. So I'm filling in those dots, although I'm trying not to do it too precisely because I'm rather hoping I'll leave some blank spots to look like highlights. Thanks for watching. See you next time.